Okay, everyone, welcome. My name is Michelle. This is Paris. We're the co-founders of the Dish Women's Network. Thank you for coming. If this is your first event, we're excited to see you. If it's not your first one, just welcome back. We're really excited to have Bernadette Aulestia from HBO. She's their EVP of Global Distribution. I was able to work with her and her team during my first year at Dish. Definitely miss them. It's one of the best crowds in the industry. So we're excited to have her here to talk about her career path, HBO, what she's excited about in the industry right now.
Great.
So with that, I'll turn it over to Bernie and let her introduce herself to you guys.
All right, great. So Bernadette, Bernie, for my friends. And yes, I've been at HBO now, and this is a great story. For a long time, I kept on telling people that I've been at HBO for 15 years, because that sounded like a good number, until I think last year speaking to the summer interns, millennials, I said something, yeah, I've been at the company like 15 years, and one of my millennials said, well, according to your bio, you started in blah, blah, so you've actually been at the company 17 years. And I was like, yeah, 17. So this is actually, you're fired. No, I'm kidding. I've been actually, so I am going into my 19th year at HBO. So I've been at the company for a while in a variety of different roles. I started, which actually I think could lead to an interesting conversation, because having been at one organization and kind of starting from a very junior role, did I say I was 15 when I started at the company? So, no, it wasn't my first job. But so I think lots of different organizations, reported into a lot of different types of structures, into a lot of different types of bosses. But it's been a fun place. I mean, listen, the industry is great. I'm sure many of you feel, or those of you who've been at the company for longer, have also seen the transformation of our industry. So I feel like even the company I joined 19 years ago was very different, even in the types of products and services that we're putting out there. So along the way, I think I've had 8 different bosses and a variety of different roles. And I'm from Ecuador originally, so I'm a U.S. citizen because I've been here for a long time. My husband's American, and that's what you do when you have American kids. But I've been here ever since college, frankly. So that's a little bit of by way of my background. So I run the domestic business, and the reason I bring that up is because I also run the international business for HBO. We are a global brand, and we have networks in 67 countries around the world. And that's been an amazing experience for me as someone who is from Latin America, but I grew up in Asia, another story. But to somewhat be able to kind of full circle bring some of my own personal experience to doing business on behalf of HBO has been amazing. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. So follow up to that, the executive president title, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis for you? Like when you get up, you go to work, what happens?
What does that mean? I like to describe it as that I think at a certain point, and I look at career progression, right? Early in your career, there's a lot of tangible things you actually produce and you make. And as my kids like to remind me, over time that has changed. Now they're like, what do you do all day? You go to meetings? I don't understand. What do you make? So, but I do think I think the progression into senior leadership, a lot of it turns into less of the day-to-day doing and more of what I like to call the blocking and tackling. And to the extent that I hope I lead my teams in a way that they know that they're to go off and running and make things happen, but obviously as they encounter questions or obstacles or socialization of ideas across the organization or management, I think a lot of the role really does become advocating on behalf of staff, advocating on behalf of ideas, working cross-functionally between teams. Like I said, I run a global entity, right? So that's about 700 people spread across all sorts of different offices and with different responsibilities. So oftentimes I feel like my job is to be a little bit of the glue of the organization and make sure that as people are off doing the great work they're doing, that I'm still making sure they feel connected to the larger objectives of the organization and the strategy and where we're trying to head. So is that good?
Yep.
So speaking of looking ahead, what are you most excited about right now at HBO?
I think there's probably never been a more exciting time to be in the content business. So as a creator of content, I think what I'm excited about is, I love consumer-centric innovation. So I think anything that touches on how we delight customers, especially now with the advent of kind of technology and consumer experiences that are different, that kind of make the consumer feel closer to our content. It is like a brave new world. I feel like every day something else is in the marketplace that is either disrupting or adding. But like I said, I think as a brand, and part of why I came to HBO and I wanted to work there, I remember when I got the call that I had an interview, it was like, whoa, is because I love the idea of the relationship that we have with consumers, and the fact that our customers feel like, they're kind of wearing a badge of honor. HBO means something. It says something about me as a customer. It says something about the types of things that I'm interested in. So accessibility for us is very exciting. We're a premium network, as you all know, and it's a tough business to be in, right? Every month people are, especially during tougher economic times, people are constantly looking at their bills and kind of how to trim down. So I think for us, what's exciting is lower price points, more accessibility, maybe new ways of consumers accessing our content. We were super pleased and excited when you guys really jumped into the marketplace. I think as what has been seen as a disruptor with Sling, right? I think that was a big surprise. It was like, wait, but they're a traditional business. What are they doing? But I think that's the type of innovation that, I think in order to win as companies, that's what we all have to be willing to do. So for us as a content creator, that's tremendously exciting.
So talking about HBO and the 15 to 17 years that you've worked there, how has that specific company impacted how you ended up where you are today? And then what conscious steps did you take? Was this always your goal to be an executive? How did you navigate that at the company?
I'm sure if we did a hands up who studied what they actually ended up doing, we probably wouldn't get a lot of people. So no, I didn't, I think I was an econ major. I wanted to work in the third world. So this is a very 180 from where I started. But I think that my roots were always, and then I had a stint in banking. And so my roots, though, have always been on the financial side of things, meaning I love the business side of what we do. I think for me, it's really just been about finding opportunities that I was passionate about, a little bit of luck in that, I do have to say, I do feel very, very fortunate that I almost kind of stumbled on the cable television environment. It wasn't like I said, I had no idea what the entertainment world looked like. I went to work for Turner, was my first job supporting ad sales, but on the finance side. So, but I think that it was always about pursuing things where I felt I could make a contribution, and where I felt like I could learn a lot. So I do tend to gravitate to the roles that nobody else wants to do. I like the challenge of something that feels new and different, and I think along the way, just being. I think one of the best pieces of advice that somebody gave me very, very early on in my career, when I thought I knew better than people who'd been at this for a while, but I still remember it, is the notion that you always look for ways to enhance your portfolio and your base of knowledge. And that if you're still feeling like you're constantly learning, then great. And so I think when someone says, wow, especially nowadays, especially when you talk to younger generation, they're like, you've been at the company for 19 years. There used to be a time where people did that. And I think a lot of that for me is, I'm actually surprised too, but I think for me, it's always felt like every few years, it was almost like starting a new job. So, I came in doing marketing, came in doing multicultural marketing at the time that, the multicultural markets were just burgeoning. It was well before the summer of Ricky Martin and Jennifer Lopez. So, it was interesting because you were out there, you were teaching a market, right? So there was that. Then I went into, then we kind of had the .com era, and I remember at the time someone saying, we really need a web site. And, being young, everybody always looks at you for things. And I remember at the time, they were like, do you know anything? And part of it is being a little bit ballsy, because I don't think I knew anything. But I was like, yes, I can figure out how we can get a website going. And I remember we went out and we built our first website. But that turned into a stint doing email, what at the time was email marketing, but really digital marketing. So there was that. Then we were launching on demand, and there was like hey, you, do you want to work on that? Sure. So I think a lot of it was just being willing to raise my hand at every juncture. And yes, 2 years ago, I feel like the call was, how about international? Sure, that's great. I felt like I could make a contribution, because I definitely looked at it and I was like, wow, we're a global brand, but we still operate like a domestic company that exports. So I think it really was being willing to raise my hand and to take the advice of looking at every new step as, is this going to expand my portfolio of knowledge? I look back and I think, wow, could I have done this job without having done all of those pieces? Probably not. But I do appreciate being able to, at the very least, relate to most of my staff. I've done an iteration of their jobs. So a while ago, but I've done it. So I think that also helps me a little bit in terms of, understanding where teams are coming from with some of their challenges.
Cool. So piggybacking off of raising your hand and volunteering for these positions, how do you advocate for yourself if you weren't picked upon to do something? And how do you advocate for yourself? And then how do you advocate for others? It's a big theme that we hear a lot of the time within the network, is how do you advocate for yourself and how do you advocate for your peers around you?
Yeah. So, I think to me it's great that you pose it that way, because to me it goes hand in hand, right? One might have come from being raised as an only child with a pretty strict dad who I remember always used to say, no one's going to do for you. And to me that carries throughout, right? I think that there's sometimes an expectation that you come in, you're going to do your job, you're going to work hard, and that someone from up on high is going to you come. And sometimes that happens for people, which is phenomenal. But I think most of the time the reality really is it's really going to come from advocacy across your peer group. And I'm a big believer in that. A lot of people, like I said, including self when I was much more junior, right? I came in, I did my job, I worked really hard, I barely looked up. And I remember my very first disappointment when a peer of mine got promoted and I didn't. And I remember it was I was being promoted to managers. And I remember it was hard, but I remember the lesson at the time really was that I really had not done as effective of a job working kind of not working up. I mean, look, there's value to working up, but I don't think I'd effectively worked my network of peers. And because I think when you're in a meeting and you're in a project, your peers being advocates for your ideas and your projects, to me, can oftentimes carry just as much weight, right, as again, some senior person being like, yeah, that was a great idea. So I think there's power in the network of your peers. I think spending time, filling your dance card, spending time not just on work projects, but really getting to know each other is a huge component. I like to talk a little bit about, and I was talking about this earlier, that there was, I thought one of the most interesting articles that came out recently was about, and again, not political, so it was about the women in the Obama administration. I don't know if anybody read that article, but I thought what was really interesting about it was really the power of informal networks. And a small group of women at the time realized very quickly that when they were in these briefing rooms and in these meetings, it's all very fast-paced, it's mostly male, and that kind of some of their ideas and voices were getting lost. And there was a little bit how do I advocate for myself? How do I make sure that my voice is heard? And I think very astutely, they all quickly realized that they were all trying to go at it individually, when really what they needed to do was work together and collectively. And so the article really is about that they almost had an informal agreement, right, and about amplifying each other's ideas. So they'd go in the room, they'd talk before the meetings a little bit about what people agenda. You'd get to the meeting, it's the meeting before the meeting concept, right? You'd get to the meeting, and when somebody said, or one of their peers said, how about this? What would oftentimes, it would move to the next person. Another peer would say, yeah, like repeat, like, I actually think that we should do that. And how amazing just that was. It just amplified and the weight of an idea or a concept. So I love that idea because I think it works across any level of the organization. I think it benefits you to know a little bit about what your peers and their agenda and what they're trying to advance. But I also think it ultimately helps kind of this notion of advocacy for one another and advocacy for your ideas. It's interesting. I did a lot of thinking before I came because having worked with you for as long as I have, I'm slightly familiar with culture, and we were talking a little bit about, I was thinking about what's the difference between maybe HBO's culture and Dish's culture, and it's interesting because I would say that as I speak to same type of group at home, it's the same type of frustrations and same types of questions that people have, right? It's like, how do you kind of break through the clutter? How do you kind of show that you're ready for that next step or for that leadership position? And it's just that the environment is different, right? And it's interesting because I'm a really candid person, and so I'm just going to kind of go there with everyone here, if you'll bear with me, and hopefully we'll get to questions and we can talk a little bit more. But like I was saying, at HBO, I think one of the criticisms that I have of our culture, it does seem like the grass is greener, and I hear a lot of people are like, wow, like I spoke at a conference for in investment banking, and so these are mostly women in a pretty much male-dominated environment. And it was interesting because the perception is that media must be so cool. Like, you work at HBO, wow, that must be so there's probably so many women, and I think the answer is, yeah, there's a lot of women working in media, but if you look at the top, not so much. And I think one of the criticisms that I would say about our culture is that there's a nuance in after a certain level, there's this almost like this EQ, right? And it's not just regular EQ. It's how the culture works, right? And understanding how people like to be interacted with, and it's almost like an intangible. And I was saying actually to Shuda, as I said, I think one of the hallmarks of your culture is that you have a pretty direct culture. I actually think that's a huge benefit, right? Because directness to me, especially when I'm coaching someone, it might be easier for me to coach someone to say, you know what, when you show up to the meeting, don't do it in 10 minutes, do it in 5, get to the point. If you disagree, make sure that you're raising your voice. At HBO, I often find that at a certain level, giving feedback on this kind of intangible, you just have to know how to read the room, oftentimes leaves, women in particular like, huh? Like, am I doing a good job? Yes, you're doing a great job. So what is it that I'm not doing that's not getting me that next level promotion? And I think it can often be frustrating because it's more, we operate in this very diplomatic culture where nobody says anything directly to you. It all happens around. I like to say that you walk into a meeting and you walk out thinking you had a great meeting, and then you're like, wait, and then you're like, I'm bleeding. What happened? There's a lot of, so I think part of my message is also, right, it's kind of know your culture. And frankly, I think take advantage of what I think are perceived benefits to the culture. But I go back to that, I still think, look, regardless of culture, like I said, I think, or companies, I still think that we're all asking each other the same questions, right? And it's like I said, it's the same question everywhere I go. It's okay, so I've kind of gotten to this level. What do I tangibly need to do to get to the next level? And like I said, my only advice really is to kind of work the power of your peers. So, hope that helps.
So, talking about women in business in particular, you mentioned coaching. How has that impacted your career, maybe receiving coaching, and what does that mean for you now as an executive?
So I've never really, I've never formally had any type of coaching. I've never formally had any type of mentor. I've never formally been in any sort of program. So I'm probably not the best example of, which by the way, I think now, it might also just be my age, right? I also think that now there is like, wow, you guys actually have a women's employee resource group. Do you know we don't have one at HBO? How about that? Right? Right? Like I go back to, really? Like grass is greener? You guys actually have one. We don't. And so I think that it's great to see employee resource groups. It's great to see like actual programs where you've got people being able to sign up to get kind of mentorship, and like it's to me, I don't know if like in my era coming up there was as much opportunity for that. So I think for me it was really more about informal networks, right? And finding, look, I've been lucky. I've had 2 amazing female bosses who were more than mentors and friends. And so I think sometimes you just get lucky, you click with who you report to or someone who can kind of show you the ropes. But I do think I go back to like working kind of that informal network, and really, like I always say, people love to talk about themselves, right? So, finding time to set up and learn about someone's career progression and how they've kind of accomplished with it is always great. I mean, to me, that's always it's always been learning. I did do a 360 once. I'm looking at my team, I'm like, maybe I should do more. I did do a 360 once that came with like a couple of coaching sessions, which I'm a big believer in the 360. I actually think that it was great there wasn't anything in there I didn't know. So I'm one of these people who, I know what my weaknesses are, I just choose to ignore them. But it was good to spend a little bit of time thinking about, how to modify some of those areas in order to be successful. Like I'll tell you one of the things that came out of that, which I think is a valid point, but I continued to ignore, is that one of the things that someone said was that I needed to own more or have more gravitas. That as a senior executive in the industry, surrounded primarily by a male C-suite, that maybe I needed to show up a little less casual, a little less, as you can see, right? I'm in jeans. I'm like, and I think it's also important to know what you're willing to compromise and not compromise. And I think for me, I understood the feedback. I get how maybe that could be better received, frankly. But that's who I am. And that was one of those moments where I was like, yeah, see, that one I'm not willing to change. I like how I show up. I like being casual. I like making people comfortable. I remember the coach said to me, he came in to meet me. He's an ex-investment banker, senior level person who's now doing coaching. And he came in to meet me in my corner office. And I do have a corner office. Mm-hmm. And he walked in and, immediately I walked up and I was like, can I get you some water? Come in. And he said to me, for example, when I walked in, if you had just paused and not started talking immediately, it was fantastic. He said, you would have, if just a beat would have, the presence of the corner office would have sunk in, and that would have been a good gravitas message. And I'm like, that's completely the opposite of me. I'm actually partially embarrassed. I'm in this corner office. I'm like, please make yourself at home. Do you want to sit here? Do you want to go have coffee? So I think this goes back to sometimes you'll get feedback, and it's also about knowing what your personal brand is. And sometimes it's okay to say, you know what, like that I'm not comfortable with because it's not me. And if I can't be successful being me here, then maybe at some point, I need to find a place where I can be successful being me.
Yeah, we hear that a lot within the network, is how do you balance who you are and how do you figure out while you're working your way up and getting that feedback, what you take in and what you don't. So I think a good question to follow up on that is, how do you give feedback? And you talked about the 360 and how you think that's a great method to do that, but how do you constantly give feedback, and how do you help someone get feedback that they're not particularly happy about?
Look, how do you give feedback? You give it directly. And I know it's not comfortable for most people, especially if you're giving constructive feedback. I actually got to tell you, I think that's actually one of the most important career development that I would get coaching on, which is how to have tough conversations with people or how to best give feedback to people. I always say, we always dread having the hard conversation, but people want clarity. Like, I find most people, even if it's bad news, you kind of want to know the truth, right? As opposed to living in some sort of fantasy where, you're not really getting the feedback, and so you think things are kind of going okay, and then later something happens and you're disappointed because you're like, wait, I thought we were kind of okay. I think staff, I think our responsibility as leaders is to be transparent with people. And I think the more transparent we are with people, even if it's hard feedback, it empowers and allows people to make their own career decisions, right? If it's never going to happen for this person for A, B, or C reasons, I think it's more torturous to not tell them. You tell them, and at that point they can decide: am I good staying where I am, or do I maybe want to move on and try and do something else? So I think transparency is key and important, and I think getting comfortable. If you're not comfortable, getting comfortable with doing that. It's probably one of the biggest, actually maybe where I should have started when you said, what do you do as an EVP? I think there's different styles of leadership, right? You can be an EVP that's a deal maker, right? And that's kind of your strength. Or you can be an EVP that really is about organizational development. And for all intents and purposes, I run the operations of our network worldwide, right? So for me, I value how you manage staff, right? How you manage departments, how you set them up to be successful. So I think in particular, it's a passion of mine, and it's probably near and dear to my heart that, like, a healthy organization is important. And a healthy organization comes from staff knowing where they stand, from understanding the rules of engagement, from having very clear deliverables about what it takes to get from one level to the next. I would say if you can't articulate to people what the difference is between a manager and a director, you have a problem, right? If it's arbitrary and there's no rule book for what are the things I kind of need to accomplish, I think it's difficult as an employee to not know. We all like lists, right? And be able to check things off and areas of expertise, or frankly, even like I said, EQ areas that one needs to develop. So I think having clear sets of expectations, transparency around that's another one, right? Job creep, when people don't really know what their job descriptions are, or how someone's job description looks awfully a lot like someone else's. I'm a stickler about trying to clarify those lines. And sometimes they're hard conversations, because sometimes it's saying to you, you know what you used to do? So a part of that now you're going to do for cleanness sake. And I know oftentimes the first initial reaction is kind of, I'm losing something, but I do find over time people appreciate the clearer lines of delineation. It's like, okay, well then now I know what I'm responsible for and what I'm being measured by.
So this is the question that always comes up, so let's dive in, because I know you were up baking cookies last night. Talk to us. We hear a lot of questions. I think work-life balance is attributed to be a women's issue. I think it goes across any executive. But the specific question we hear a lot is, how does that evolve, right? Like, you might have a work-life balance. I want to go to the gym and I want to go home after work. Or maybe I have 3 kids at home. How has that changed for you? And is there any sort of balance that you've tried to keep?
So one, I completely agree with your first statement, which is this notion that work-life balance is a primarily female issue. I have plenty of male colleagues who have the exact same manic, try to get all your kids in the car and out to school in the morning as I do. So I also think that kind of that notion has definitely evolved across the board as you kind of see parental roles evolve and change. But I think I'm a little bit in the camp that it's a myth. at the end of the day, I think what you just get better at is that you get better at compromise, right? I remember so I have 3 kids, high school, middle school, elementary school, 3 different schools. And I remember when I had my first kid coming back from maternity leave and being stressed out about, 500 million things, and back to another very wise person who at the time said to me, because I remember coming in and having one of those, I'm not being 100% at work, I'm not being I'm a crier, by the way. I'm not 100% I'm not 100% mom, I'm not 100% with my husband, I'm a mess. And I remember, talk about frank conversation, she didn't even empathize, she was just kind of like, you're just gonna have to get used to good enough. I remember being like, what? And she said, yeah, because you're one of these people who's used to being 100%, and you can't be 100, 100, and 300. There's only 100 of you, and it's gonna have to be split up. And I remember she said, and some phone calls will go unanswered. And some projects will have to wait till the next day, or something will have to be delivered that you wouldn't 100% be like, yeah, but that's that. So I think it's an evolution in compromise, and I think you just get better at the multitasking. I don't think the mania gets any less. I don't really believe that you get any better at it until they finally leave the house. I really just think that you get better at doing 5 things at the same time. I really literally was thinking about this morning. So yes, I have a teen in high school who, you can't tell them anything. They think they know better. Decided to bake cookies for her classmates at 10 p.m. So I was supervising. I was just commenting also on raising teenagers that you fluctuate between having, being friends to your kids and then being parents, and it all happened in the span of 2 hours for me. I started saying, oh, what a great bonding experience. We're going to make cookies at 10 p.m., even though I have a 4 a.m. wake-up call to get on a plane to get here. And then that quickly evolved into mom coming in and being like, you need to clean this up because we need to wrap this up. So by 1 a.m., we were done. By 4 a.m., I was up and out the door in a sweatshirt and jeans, so apologize. And yes, and running to your lobby to go into that nice little bathroom that you have right at the entrance. I'm sure the woman who was outside was like, wow, she's taking a long time in there. It was like a makeover. I came out like a new person, put on some heels, and here I am. So I think that is just, I think you just get used to that's the pace. And you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. My husband's like, why do you get up on these crazy early flights? And I'm like, you know why? Because I want to be here. I want to be here to bake cookies with her or put my kid to bed. So I think you find the right balance, and it's crazy, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
So to that end, how do you stay motivated with all of the craziness, all of the work, all of the family? What keeps you going?
Well, I think fundamentally I am a person who feeds off of other people, like energy. For me, that is energy. I love my team. I mean, listen, there are days that I want to look in at Andy because, we're in a tough business where not every day is pleasant. But there are days that the work is kind of like, oh, but I love my team. I love the people I work with, and they energize me. Sometimes I'm down, they're up. I have a fantastic spouse, and he and I always say that. Sometimes he'll be down and I'll be down, and I'm like, no, we can't be down at the same time. One of us got to be up for the other one. So I definitely am a person who I think gains energy from people around me, and that's how I stay motivated. And like I said, I love the business we're in. I do. It's a hard business. It's getting harder. There's a lot of uncertainty about what our businesses look like in the future, but I like challenges. It's exciting. I feel like if it was the same every day, I'd probably not be as high energy. But yeah, I kind of try to. Like I said, I really. I don't know how many times have I said about people, peers. I do. I suck energy from those around me, and my hope is that I give that same energy to people as well when they need it. So.
Okay, so when we look at driving diversity within our industry, how do we engage men in this talk, and how do you promote diversity
They're
within HBO?
here. They're here. Look, front and center. Yeah, I mean, I think I go back to, it's almost like even the question, like we were talking about work-life balance. I know kids, family. We're all kind of in the same. Especially, I think generationally, you find that we're all in it together. Wrestling with the same balances that we're all trying to make, and certainly we fundamentally need each other as teams, as coworkers, in order to make things happen. So I like just to think that naturally that evolution is happening, and I think frankly that our role as women and as women who create forums like this, it is to make those feel inclusive, right? And to make them feel like it's not one versus the other. It's just that we have different issues that we're trying to all navigate as we're, balancing career. Yeah, I think to me that's, but I'm probably like more in the middle of, believe me, I have colleagues who are on certainly more on the other end of the spectrum in terms of doing things that are really distinctly and uniquely for women, and I think that those are necessary and vital. But I go back to that. I think in the workplace, like to me, this type of forum is amazing. And my hope is that everything I had to say didn't just apply to the women in the room, but for the men in the room. I love it. You're here, but I think continuing to show up is huge, right? And because I think advocacy again works when we're all in it together.
Okay, questions, anyone?
I have a fun question.
Great.
So you work for HBO, and you guys for any of have you ever met with or been able to interact with, your favorite star from your favorite TV show or anything like that? And if you have, what was your best experience or your best story?
Oh, that's a hard one. Yeah, okay, so there's a couple of people that I feel like have been wow. And I do have to say, one of them was at the Emmys a couple of years back, Jane Fonda. And she was in the newsroom, and first of all, I loved her role. She was like, powerful, like senior woman. And she's just as stunning in person, which I think is part of it, that you're like, wow, she looks amazing. And she's lovely. So to me, that was like a moment. All right, as a woman, I loved meeting Khal Drogo from first season Game of Thrones. I was like, wow, can I take a picture with you? So yes, that one. That was a good one. And then I'm trying to think like. Yeah, I mean, I love all our talent. They're all amazing. A way, Sarah Jessica Parker, one of the nicest, just amazing, down-to-earth stars that you'll ever meet. I mean, she's a gem and like normal and nice and pretty, and she's tiny, but she's fantastic. And I guess I'm a big newsroom person, because I remember that same year Jeff Bridges was like the other one that was at the Emmys. I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I think those are I would say, like, those are my highlights. I'm actually not a person that takes pictures with people, so those are the ones that I actually was like, I'm gonna man up and be like, hi, can I take a picture with you? So yeah, those are kind of some of my fun ones. But I get very embarrassed around talent. Like I don't like to bother them, because you kind of feel like they probably get bothered all the time. So.
My question, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier about your corner office. It was just a small comment, but I kind of held on to it for a while, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. You said you were embarrassed by your corner office, and I would argue that women probably are, or our men counterparts probably aren't. Why do you have those feelings about your corner office?
Well, what's interesting, because I do think this had a lot to do with the feedback that ultimately I had the conversation with the coach about, because I think that's exactly what he wanted to get to. He was like, why? Like, why don't you want to own that you are a powerful woman, and this fantastic corner office, and that when someone comes into your office, they need to appreciate your position. And I think a lot of it may have to do, and look, this is total generalization, so I do think that, for me, I definitely am more of the prototype of woman who, I like being very collaborative. Like, to me, let me tell you, if I need to advocate for your promotion, I'm a bear, mama bear, rah! But when it comes to like me advocating for myself, nah, I'm not comfortable with that. So I do have to say, like, I think a lot of it just has to do with I'm better at it when it's about the team and it's about doing what's right for people or an individual. When it comes to me, I think just personally, I just happen to be one of these people who, yeah, I don't really like, I don't like leading by position, right? My title doesn't bestow me anything. I mean, sure, it does, but if I'm a horrible leader, it doesn't matter that I'm an EVP, right? I feel like my hope is that people respect my position because I try to do what's best for the company, because I try to do it in a way that's fair and collaborative. I try to do it in a way that's not, look what I did. Is it a disadvantage? Because I think that's maybe where you're getting at is the question. Is it that oftentimes that because a lot of women are more comfortable in that style, that ultimately we get disadvantaged? Because you know what, we're not in there saying, look what I did, look what I did. Even though I did 90% of the work, I'm still saying, look what we did, look what we did. And you're right, I find that men are certainly much more comfortable doing that, more than women are. I find women definitely use the we a lot. You know, it's actually interesting. Do you guys do performance reviews? Yeah. So somebody said to me, print out your last 5 years performance reviews and read what you wrote. Try and be as objective as possible. Read what you wrote about your accomplishments. And I remember being like, what? And read it, and she was absolutely right. Everything I had written was in like, it wasn't like I accomplished this, I did it. It was actually, all of it was written in, you know, my team, or I led my team to do this. There was a lot of conversation about like the group, and it was very clear that I personally was not comfortable with singling myself out as, and so back to position, office, all those things. Yeah, to me, they all get strung together, and part of it is, like I said, just personality. I don't know. I'm just kind of me. I love being the underdog. I really do. I like when people underestimate me. I love walking in a room with a male colleague and having the first conversations being directed at him, even though he works for me. I love that. I love it. I'm like, yeah, okay, talk to him. So I think so. Some of it's me, but I do think you're right. I do think sometimes there's a listen, there's books about it, there's articles about, right, the notion of imposter syndrome. A lot of women sometimes, you know, it's like the job was a stretch and you don't feel like you're ready for the job until you've mastered everything. For our male counterparts, often the job is a stretch. Yeah, I can do that job. You know, it's some of it has to do with this notion that I'm going to get there and other people are going to be like, you don't know how to do this, and getting comfortable with that. But I do have some tools that some people along the way have instilled in me. I try to be more conscious of when I do it in meetings. I'm still I never like to take credit for other people's work. Or if we were collaborating. But I'm trying to push myself to, when this is something that I did, being more comfortable once in a while, dropping in the, yeah, here's what I think, here's my idea. But I'm still a work in progress. I do have a nice office though.
So you mentioned that HBO doesn't have a women's network. What kind of leadership training do you offer, and what has been impactful to you if you've taken that position?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's been an ongoing conversation within HBO. So one of the reasons that we don't have a women's network is because there's a lot of women at HBO. And so I think someone was like, well, if there's a lot of women, we must not need a women's network. So interestingly enough, I think back to leadership and what I think is what I've been able to take advantage. I've actually been, from a women's standpoint, I've actually been able to take advantage of more industry-related things, right? Programs that are specifically aimed at developing leadership skills for women, but they're mostly like industry group type things. And then within HBO, there's general leadership, right? But I'm one of these people who always likes to learn. So I don't just do the courses that I'm required to do or the things that my boss has suggested I do. I tend to like to have conversations with HR about what else, I'm always trying to brush up my skills, right? What other opportunities are there? What other courses are they offering? And like I said, sometimes it seems, I'm telling you, I took the, there was a course that was about managing during times of change, right? I find all of those things, hopefully, back to where I started about even just functionally my job, my hope is that I'm just adding to my portfolio, right? If I'm not a person who naturally has hard conversations, how can I get better at that? If I'm a person who, like someone asked, I do interviews a lot, or panels, and back to peers, someone I respect very much said to me, when you speak, you say a couple of words he mentioned. You say them a lot. And you know what that prompted me to, I called HR and I was like, do I have any public speaking things? Because I've been at this for a long time. I know I do this all the time, but I've actually never taken a class. And as a matter of fact, there is one. So I'm going to do it. So I think I just always like to try and find within the organization, what are we offering that I could glom onto. But certainly I think outside the industry, there's a lot of industry groups that do a lot of programs. And, talk about advocating for yourself. To me, that's the stuff that advocating to your boss and saying, hey, I'd really like to do this. Could you? Because those things cost money and, require oftentimes somebody. But I think those are the types of things that I love when my staff comes and asks me and says, I want to do this thing. It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of attributes that are kind of usually assigned to women as opposed to men, like being sensitive or emotional. How do you use those to kind of help yourself in a position of how you work?
Let's see. I think, I think that, like I said, and not generalizations, but I do think that ability to collaborate effectively and work in formal networks and lead not necessarily through power and position, but through kind of galvanizing support and pushing people towards an initiative. I think that some of those traits that tend to be seen as things that women do well, I think are always fantastic traits, right? When you're trying to, so I think those are really important. Look, I'll be candid though, because back to actually where I started, where I was like, I've reached a point where now if somebody says to me, you should do this, I can say, no, I don't want to do that. Obviously, the more senior you are, the more leeway I do find that there is to kind of bring out more of your own personal style. I find that earlier in your career, you're still trying to abide by the mold of what you think the organization, thinks of as success or as tolerable behavior. So I don't want to minimize how important that is, because especially in middle management and below, that is huge, because how you show up and whether you're an obvious cultural fit is going to determine success. But yeah, I think it's knowing yourself and ultimately what are those things that you tend to get the most compliments about in terms of your work style, and somewhat, I think, a little bit over rotating on some or leaning into some of them a little bit more, because if you're great at cross collaboration and working across teams, and as has happened to me, you have a boss who is not, that's great. Oftentimes what happens is that everybody ends up wanting to come to you with the issue, and you know what, thankfully, look, my boss is like, yeah, you go talk to them because that seems to work. So I think it's knowing what are those strengths, and are there ways for you to lean into them in a way that that ultimately benefits your style, the work, and what you're trying to accomplish. I said I'm a crier, but I don't cry in front of certain people. Know who to cry in front of. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Yep.
So you've had a lot of different roles at HBO throughout the years and a lot of different bosses. How do you decide, I'm happy where I am now, I want to go do something else? Did you think 4 years, it's been too long, I really need to change my position around and sort of disrupt my life? How do you decide when to do that?
So for me, it takes knowing you, right, and what you're comfortable with. I get bored, and when I start to realize that I'm, somewhat not my regular enthusiastic self, but I'm kind of all right. I do tend to kind of itch for new, and so I think as long as I'm kind of in the challenge and I'm learning, I tend to be doing great. It's when I hit the I can sense it. I know it when I'm a little restless, because it's kind of feeling like just doing the same thing. But that's me, right? Because you all have to know each other. Some people, consistency is what feeds them. Some people, like me, consistency is the death of me. So, I actually even personally, I kind of know this about myself. I even start to exhibit what I would consider not great behavior, meaning because I can tell that I'm just not fully engaged. And and there's been junctures in my career at HBO that I thought it was time for me to leave. And it just so happened that there was a completely different opportunity that I could jump into, and I was like, okay, sure. But I had to vocalize that. I needed to raise my hand and have those conversations every single time. I remember when I launched HBO Latino, which was my baby, right? I'd worked on this project and launched it, and it was phenomenal. And I remember we did it, we launched it, it was out the door, and then I kind of got a little bit into a rut, and I was trying to figure out what is it. And then I realized that it was that I wanted to do something different. And I went into my boss and I said, listen, can I talk to you about something? I'd like to work on something completely different. Totally unrelated to HBO Latino. I want to work on the satellite business. I remember that conversation, and she was like, what? You're GM of this thing. Don't you want to continue? And I was like, no, I'm done. I want to learn something new. I have not worked on the distributor side of the business. I remember at the time that was a conversation, and I'd really like to learn how to do that. And for me, a lot of it had to do with identity. I also don't want to be the Hispanic chick who's the Hispanic executive who launched HBO Latino. She's a great executive because she's a Latina executive. I was like, I want people to see me as just a great general market executive. And for me, I needed to completely let go of that so that I could just work on something else. And on those merits, people would be like, yeah, she's a great marketer. But it took having, and believe me, I was scared to death when I had that. I was like, this is such a dumb idea, but I did it, and it was probably one of the best conversations and progressions that I've made.
Anyone else? Well, thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me. Oh, it's great. Thanks.